This just happened about 1 hour ago, so my memory is fresh. First off, I live in a very rural area, a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses. It's close to the highway, which is only about a 5-minute drive and also about 10 minutes away from the nearest town. If you cross the street, it's just a 10-minute walk to the forest. It was the afternoon on the first day of Christmas, and my partner and I decided to go for a little walk to help digest all the food we had eaten. It was around 5 in the evening and already dark when we left. We brought a big, bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, since I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk along a country road toward the forest, then turn right onto a small graveled cycle track close to the edge of the forest. This track connects our village to the next one, which is about a 15 to 20-minute walk. In the middle of the track, there's a small stretch that goes through the forest. This area is quite dark, with tall, dense trees. When we entered this part, I noticed our flashlight reflecting off something. It was a car parked on the side of the track near the trees. This seemed odd, since cars aren't allowed to drive there, and the path is very narrow and hidden. Feeling cautious, my partner shined the light inside the car, but it seemed empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so the car must have been there for a while. A little way in front of the car, I saw an interestingly shaped tree. I asked my partner to shine the flashlight on it so I could focus better and take some pictures with my flash. After I took a few shots, and my partner said, "There's someone standing behind us in the middle of the road, just looking at us." No one had been following us the entire way. I kept looking around occasionally since wild boars sometimes roam near the forest edge at this time of night, especially since it's mating season and they can be more aggressive. Sure enough, a man was standing behind us, just outside the reach of our flashlight. He didn't say anything. He was just standing there watching us. At first, I thought maybe he was startled. After all, it might look strange if someone suddenly starts taking pictures near your car, especially if it's not even allowed on that path. I decided to confront him but kept my distance. I explained that I was just photographing the tree. He didn't respond and continued to stand there silently. I then asked if he needed light, but he simply replied that it wasn't necessary. It felt odd, but I tried to stay calm, thinking there might be a normal explanation for his behavior. Still, my partner and I decided to leave and continued along the path toward the next village, which was only about 5 to 7 minutes away. After we reached the first streetlight in the next village, we looked back. We saw the car drive a little out of the forest, then turn around and go back inside. I could see that he parked there again and turned off his lights. He didn't leave the forest. We ended up taking a much longer route home as I didn't want to go back to the same way for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died along the way, and my phone battery was running low, so I didn't call the police right then. However, as soon as we got home, I called and reported all the details. Big regret that I didn't remember the entire license plate. It all happened so quickly that I just didn't think to memorize it. It only struck me as really strange later, especially when I recalled the frozen windows and realized he couldn't have just walked up behind us. Plus, he had no light and didn't respond. It felt like he was sneaking up on us while I was taking the picture. I feel lucky that I had my partner and the camera and a bright flashlight with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I'd been alone. So to the creepy guy sneaking around in the forest, let's not meet. Edit. When I told my housemate, she suggested he might have been spying on the houses near the forest edge. You could easily look into their backyards from a bit up the hill without being seen. It's only about a 5-minute walk. I actually thought about photographing the car when I first saw it, but decided not to as I felt uneasy about it, despite how interesting the scene looked. In hindsight, I think not taking the photo might have saved me. He must have been hiding behind the trees close to the car in the forest entrance. If he was really planning something like a burglary, or something worse like dumping a body, he might have tried to stop me if he thought I'd taken a picture of his car and license plate. Update: I went back and found a small tape marking on one of the trees, a tiny hideout, more like a place to store things than to sit in, and even part of a cut-off backpack. One time I went to a bar with a friend. I had just turned 21, so I hadn't been to many bars up to that point. My friend had been drinking on the way there, so he was already pretty drunk when we arrived. When we sat at the bar, a cute girl came over to talk to us. She introduced herself as Candace, and I noticed she had extremely bright red hair, so bright that I figured it was dyed. It was pretty, but obviously not natural. This girl started flirting with both me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already very drunk, so I decided to play along and pretend I was drunk too, since it seemed to be working for him. I wasn't sure if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her we didn't have much money. To my surprise, she offered to buy us drinks. She kept ordering more for us, and I started to get confused about who she was really interested in. My friend eventually went to the bathroom, but before he could come back, the bouncers kicked him out for being too drunk. Candace and I went outside with him. She kept insisting that he should go home with her, but he was so out of it that he could barely respond. I told her he was too drunk to go anywhere, and I didn't want him waking up hungover in some random house, with no car and no idea what had happened. Candace kept pushing, saying she'd take care of him, but I refused. I told her I was more sober than him and he was my responsibility. I told her the only way he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. She seemed to think I was either jealous or just trying to interfere, but by that point my friend could barely stand and wasn't even paying attention to her anymore. She then started flirting with me instead and offered to get my friend a taxi so we could go to her place alone. At this point I'd had a few drinks, so I was buzzed and ended up agreeing. We got my friend into a taxi and then she and I walked to her car. I stumbled slightly on the way and she held onto my arm smiling. "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" she said. I felt a bit shy and anxious. Everything was just happening too easily and it felt a little off. We got in her car and as we drove, she suggested we stop at a liquor store to pick up more drinks. She insisted on paying, so I agreed and asked her to get me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went into the store and came back with more than just a pint. She'd gotten a whole fifth. I assumed she wanted to drink too, which is why she bought so much. As we drove, we passed the bottle back and forth, but I noticed she was only taking tiny sips. I tried to do the same, but she kept encouraging me to drink more. I pretended to drink by spitting the liquor into the apple juice bottle. Eventually, I tossed the apple juice bottle, now full of liquor, out the window when she wasn't looking. She thought I was drinking heavily, but I was really just buzzed, not drunk. During the ride, I deliberately called her by the wrong name a few times to see how she'd react. She didn't correct me and let me keep calling her Carla, which struck me as strange. I began to think she might have lied about her name. When we arrived at her house, I pretended to trip and stumble into her front door. She helped me inside by holding me up, and once we were in, she closed the door and locked it. I thought it was odd, but figured maybe she just didn't want anyone to interrupt us. I told her I needed to use the bathroom. Inside, I looked in the mirror and started feeling strange. Something was off. I could feel myself getting more drunk from the last few sips of liquor, and I didn't want to lose control. So I turned on the sink for noise and made myself throw up. Then I drank some tap water from my hands, hoping it would help sober me up. I still wanted to hook up with Candace, so I planned to keep pretending to be drunk. As I turned off the sink, I heard her talking to someone. "He's drunk as hell, he can barely stand up. You do it." Who was she talking to and what were they planning? I left the bathroom and entered the living room. Just as I stepped in, I saw her quickly walking into another room. All I caught was the back of her head, with that strange, bright red hair disappearing into the next room. I couldn't see her face or anything, just her moving quickly away. The living room was dimly lit. "Hey, where are you going?" I slurred, trying to sound drunk. She returned and told me, "Let's go to my room." I looked at her bright red hair and then at her face, but her eyes looked different. Her face was different. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the same girl. It was another girl, but with the same wig. My heart dropped, but I tried to act like I hadn't noticed. I smiled at her and said I needed to use the bathroom one more time, apologizing for being so drunk. She replied, "It's fine, just hurry up in there." I went back into the bathroom, locked the door, and then heard her whispering to someone. This time I thought I heard a male voice whisper back. I didn't focus on their exact words. I just knew something sketchy was going on, and I had to get out of there. I opened the bathroom window, climbed out, and ran as fast as I could without looking back. I ran through the backyard, hopped a fence, cut through another yard, and reached the main road, where I kept running until I found a 24-hour convenience store. I went inside, stood in front of the security camera, called a taxi, and went home. Since that night, I've often wondered what was going on. What were they planning? Why did she give me a fake name? Why did she try so hard to get my friend and me drunk? I thought it might have been a setup for a robbery, but she spent a lot of money on us, bought drinks, and even paid for my friend's taxi. And why was there a wig that two different women wore? Who was she talking to, and what were they planning to do in that room? Edit. The next day, I went back to the house with a few friends to see if we could figure out what had happened. The place was completely empty. No cars, no people, just an empty house. I later found out that it was a summer rental property, and whoever those people were, they had broken in, used it for just that night, and never came back. This happened 28 years ago in July of 1996. I had just finished my term of service in the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight that I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day I was so anxious to leave that I had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 11:45 p.m., I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't leave until you get your final sign-off from the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited and waited, and finally at 2:45 a.m. he returned. I turned in my key, got the sign-off, and by 3:30 a.m. I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that I felt like I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline didn't last long, and by the time I was getting through Dallas, I was starting to nod off. I decided just past Denton that I would pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. I could barely keep my eyes open when I came to a stop. I pulled over and got out of my car to get some air. throw something away, and take a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was a picnic stop, not a full rest stop, so there were no restrooms. I threw my trash away and glanced at a missing persons poster, but I didn't really pay attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I cracked the windows, turned on my boombox for some tunes, and laid down to get some sleep. I was only asleep for about 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked, but didn't see anything, so I blew it off and went back to sleep. Then I heard what sounded like my door handle being pulled and something scratching on the door key. I sat up quickly but didn't see anyone. I checked all the windows and still didn't see anyone, so I shrugged it off as me being tired and laid back down, turning up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was hot, but I was so tired that I just laid back down. A few minutes later, I heard the door handle again and the car shook. I sat up quickly and saw a man standing at the passenger side, looking in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't see his face. Being young, dumb, and just out of the military, I yelled at him, "What the hell do you want?" He just stared at me so like an idiot I got out of the car. Mind you, I am only 5'6", but I was pissed. He just walked off towards the picnic tables like nothing happened. All the while, I was yelling at him that if he came back, I'd take him out. I decided I would just drive on from there. I got back in and started driving again. Even though I was upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was super tired again. Luckily, about another 10 miles down I-35, there was another picnic stop. North Texas doesn't have many rest areas, but it has plenty of picnic stops. I pulled into the second picnic stop and backed into a spot in case I needed to leave quickly. For some reason, there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks. Again, I locked the doors, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep right away. About 30 minutes later, I heard a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up, looked around, and saw no one. I got out of the car, which was very stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going. Still, no one was around. I assumed it was my nerves from the other stop. I got back in, locked the doors, and tried to close my eyes. This time, I was too amped up to fall asleep, so I just laid there with my eyes closed. I felt like someone was looking at me, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the guy standing there again in the red sweatshirt with the hood up. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see that he was smiling at me. I jumped up quickly and tried to open the door to bump him. Since it was a cheap Geo, the doors were locked and it didn't open. He started walking backwards, still staring at me. By the time I got out, he was about 30 feet away facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he seemed real skinny, but about 6'2" or 6'3". But I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. Yeah, right. He was wearing the red sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shining every now and then as he stood there staring at me. I believed it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat, yelling at him to come get some. Not sure why I said that. He started walking towards me and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking as I got about 5 feet from my car and he was now about 15 feet from me. A yellow van pulled up quickly and parked just off to the side of my car. I finally realized what was really happening, and I saw 2 guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition, so since I had backed in, I was able to cut it hard right and peel out of there. I was so lucky that it was a manual car and I didn't stall. The other two guys were out of the van and the first guy was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and to use the restroom. In the restroom, I noticed that same flyer I barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was a flyer with several missing persons on it, warning people not to stop for long periods at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as being about 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin wide awake. I'm not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. Now, I live in North Texas, and I pass those two picnic stops every day on my way to work. I think about it often. I wonder if they got anyone else or if they caught those guys. I tried looking it up, but I haven't found any stories about it on the internet. So creepy dudes in the sweatshirts in Texas in July, let's not ever meet again. This happened a long time ago. At the time, I was living alone in a first-floor apartment. My girlfriend had been sick and ended up in the hospital dealing with a rare disease. She recovered fine, but during those weeks, my life was pretty much go to work, go to the hospital to be with her, come back home for dinner, and then bed. It was a Friday night and I was alone, so I decided to distract myself by reading and watching some videos on YouTube. Hours passed, and by 3 in the morning, I was in bed with my iPad in hand, almost falling asleep. Then I heard it. I knew that sound well. You see, right outside my bedroom door was a long corridor that led directly to the kitchen. This apartment was in a building built in the 1950s, and the kitchen door was old and slightly bent. That meant that whenever you turned the doorknob to open the door, it would snap out of place with a distinct clack sound. That was the sound I had just heard. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind in that moment. Had I dreamt it in my semi-sleeping state? Or maybe the sound was real, but the doorknob mechanism broke, causing it to open by itself. Or of course, maybe someone was in my apartment and had just opened the door. At this point, my heart was racing, and I started considering my options. I had a broomstick next to my bed. You might ask why I had it there. And to be honest, I kept it exactly because I lived alone and thought one day I might be in a situation like this where I'd need a weapon. My girlfriend used to joke about it, but I guess my paranoia was paying off in the most unfortunate of situations. So I decided I would take the stick in one hand and grab my cell phone with the other. I planned to open my bedroom door while calling 911. And if no one else was in the apartment, I just apologized to the operator and explained the situation. However, back in those days, my cell phone wasn't a smartphone, but it did have this feature I found interesting, even though I never used it. If you pressed a couple of specific keys, it would start ringing as if someone was calling you. It was meant to simulate an incoming call, helping you get out of a boring conversation or a tough situation. Clumsily, I pressed those keys and the phone started ringing. I quickly shut it off, but now it was clear inside the apartment that I was awake. If someone was outside my bedroom, they had certainly heard it. What was going to happen? I stopped for a few seconds to listen to my surroundings. Nothing. It was dead quiet. I decided to continue with my plan. I dialed 911 with one hand, raised the broomstick with the other, and quickly opened the door. As soon as I did, someone sprinted in front of me in the corridor and quickly went into the kitchen, closing the door behind them. I screamed, "Hey!" and started pursuing, but a split second later I thought, "Stop! What if there is someone else in the apartment? What if another intruder sneaks up on you from behind? In front of me was the corridor to the kitchen, but on my left was another corridor that led to the living room and office. The office light was on, so the intruder had been there, but I didn't know if he had company. I took a step back to the entrance of my room so I wouldn't be caught off guard. "Sir, are you there?" The 911 operator was calling me on the phone. I quickly explained what was happening, gave him my address, and he told me the police were on their way. They had a patrol car nearby, so I should just wait. Then he hung up. The apartment was dead silent. I was terrified. There were only 3 things I had been able to notice about the intruder. He wore a light-colored sweatshirt with horizontal black lines, had dark hair, and smelled really bad. In fact, the smell was still lingering in the apartment. The police arrived after 7 or 8 minutes, which felt like ages. The apartment door was next to the bedroom, so I managed to approach it and unlock the door to let them in. I explained what had happened to the police, and they said we should go through the whole apartment and check every possible hiding place. They had seen situations before where a burglar hid for a long period, even after the homeowners had called the police, later attacking them. The apartment wasn't big, so it was easy to confirm that no one else was hiding there. In the kitchen, it was obvious what had happened. There were large windows that faced the back of the building, overlooking a small community garden. I had left one of the windows open, and outside, along the wall, there was a large drain pipe. The intruder had used that pipe to climb to my window and get inside. The police left to look around the neighborhood for someone matching the description of the sweatshirt I described. While they were gone, I could still smell that horrible odor the intruder left in the apartment. After about 20 minutes, they returned, but they couldn't find anyone. The burglar was long gone. Luckily, he didn't have the chance to steal anything while he was in my apartment. But the audacity. I mean, he must have seen the light on in my bedroom through the edges of the door and still tried to sneak past it to steal something from the office. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went to the garden in the back to look for any clues about the intruder, but I couldn't find anything. A neighbor in the building next door was at her window, and I called out to her. I told her what had happened. She just smiled and said, "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. We all have stories like that around here. You should never leave your windows open, and maybe you should consider putting up bars to protect them." The next day, I bought a motion alarm and installed it in the kitchen. I never had another experience like that in that apartment. But to be honest, I never slept the same way in that bedroom again, traumatized by those events. At night, I feared hearing the sound of the kitchen door snapping out of place again. A few years later, I moved to a larger apartment in another neighborhood. This time, it was on the 7th floor, making it much harder for intruders to get in through the windows. So to the intruder who came into my apartment and smelled really bad, let's never meet again. In 2019, I bought tickets for my sister and me to see 21 Pilots in Oklahoma City. At the time, I was a 20-year-old petite woman. I'm a super fan of their music, so I made my sister pack and be ready to line up at the venue around 2 to 3 in the morning to get decent spots in the pit. We got there and were greeted by other fans having a pretty good time. I was able to park my car in a lot pretty close to the venue and got away with it until about 5 to 6 a.m. when police or venue management, I can't remember which, told us that anyone parked in that lot would be towed if not moved within the next hour. By that time, the venue management had made an actual line up to the door. My sister didn't have her license at the time, and we had gotten acquainted with some people in line, so I felt comfortable leaving her there while I found somewhere new to park. Fast forward to me finding a Sonic nearby, and I figured I could get away with free parking. I started the almost 1-mile walk back to the venue. Then I found an alleyway that looked to be one of those nightlife streets connected to bars. Since it was broad daylight and I knew I'd save time going this route, I wasn't apprehensive about taking the alley. About halfway through, I saw a thin man no older than his 40s, sitting at one of the bar's back patios. When he saw me, he made a joke about a pillow I was carrying. My sister had texted me to bring it back so she could nap before the concert. He then asked me where I was headed, and I stupidly told him I was going to the concert downtown. He asked if I wanted drugs, and to which I replied no. Then he asked if he could come with me, and I lied, telling him it was sold out. The entire time I kept walking while he was talking, hoping to shake him off or show no interest in the conversation. When I reached the end of the alley, I had a bad feeling I was being followed. When I turned the corner, I quickly jogged, hoping to gain some distance. Unfortunately, I was right. I remember hearing fast footsteps behind me, then suddenly stopping when I turned to look. It was almost like a movie where he would rush behind something when I turned, thinking I didn't see him. At this point, I panicked and started looking for the closest store. It was about 5:30 to 6 a.m., so anything I passed was closed. Plus, I was in a suburban area with more apartment buildings than stores. I turned another corner and saw a man coming out of his home. I hurried up to him and remember asking if he could help me because I was scared and felt unsafe from someone following me. By this point, the scrawny man from the alley had caught up and was only a few feet away. The man I had approached then looked at both of us and told me, "Sorry, I can't help you," and proceeded to close the door in my face. I've never felt so utterly helpless in my life. I turned to the creepy guy and pleaded with him to please leave me alone. He kept telling me that I wasn't going anywhere and I wasn't going to any concert, along with other threatening comments. By some luck, I spotted a group of people wearing 21 Pilots merchandise across the street and sprinted over to walk next to them. I quickly told them what was happening and asked if I could walk with them to the venue, and they said yes. I think the creepy man lost interest in me and I saw him walking slowly back in the opposite direction. I made it back to the venue safely but immediately broke down when I saw my sister. I thanked my new acquaintances and called the cops. I was told, "He does that a lot and he's not harmless." The venue's bodyguards said they would walk me to my car after the concert, but when I returned to the same spot, they weren't there. To say I was disappointed by how it was handled is an understatement. It still freaks me out to this day how easily I could have been taken or how close I was to not being here to share this story. April 2021. Background. My name is Janelle. I'm a 21-year-old French girl, sorry about my English, and I'm a student in Lille, France. Tired of not finding true love, I decided to lose my virginity to my best friend. After that, I met a fantastic sex friend with whom I got along wonderfully on all levels for 3 months. But then he told me, I still love my ex. Yes, I was devastated. I couldn't take it. I was so done. I went to the emergency room and then the mental hospital. For those of you who are quick to understand, I had already been struggling with depression for a few months, under treatment, with a strong penchant for alcohol. To complete my self-destructive behavior, what better way than dating apps? The match. A few weeks after being released from the mental hospital, I matched with a guy to make new encounters, and mostly to forget my dear and tender sex friend. I always meet the guys at home for a first date because I have zero experience, and that's what I did for my very first date. One day I matched with a guy, let's call him Mathieu. Mathieu wasn't very good looking and had a few extra pounds, but I'm no Beyonce either, so I matched with him. We laughed a bit, had some common interests, and he smoked weed, which seemed like the perfect plan to smoke some joints between 2 sex sessions. He gave me some personal information like his address. I wasn't sure if it was real. And his old job, he had just been fired. Work or not, I didn't care. I wasn't planning on spending my life with him. I explained to him that I was fragile and had just come out of a mental clinic, and that I was depressed, blah blah blah. I just wanted to make sure he understood that I wasn't someone to be played with. I also told him that I was looking for a sex session, but with conversation, affection, and cuddles, not just a quickie. He assured me that was exactly what he was looking for too, and that he was actually very cuddly. Perfect. After just 1 or 2 days of chatting, we agreed on a date, a mojito party at my house, and he would bring some joints. The meeting. Mathieu arrived. He wasn't cute at all, worse than in the photos. He had greasy hair, a stained t-shirt, and looked like a teenager who still hadn't figured himself out, even though he was 26. I wasn't exactly feeling attracted to him, but I desperately needed some company. I offered to make the drinks while he went to the kitchen to prepare 2 mojitos before joining me on the sofa. We talked a bit, but he wasn't very smart or interesting, so I drowned in my drink, hoping to make the party more fun myself. After that, I don't remember much. Reconstruction. According to Mathieu, we had drunk and smoked while watching a movie before going to the bedroom. I vaguely remember being naked on my bed and seeing him dressed, standing above me looking at me before turning and slamming the door. My phone was dying. My alarm wasn't ringing. I missed a work meeting, so my friends started calling me. They couldn't reach me, so they contacted my sister, but she also went to voicemail. My friends came to my apartment, ringing the doorbell repeatedly, but there was no answer. They called the fire department, who managed to open the bottom door but not the door to my apartment. They knocked on the door and called out to me, and I finally opened it, dressed in a blanket to hide my nakedness, feeling confused. The firemen concluded that I was just hungover and left, while my friends helped me get dressed. They noticed that my body was covered in yellow betadine on my arms, legs, stomach, etc. I told them I had burned myself the previous day and was trying to heal it, but there were no signs of burns on my arm, and I didn't even own any betadine. They took my cat and brought me to one of their houses since I was in a comatose state. I had trouble speaking. I seemed completely out of it, and I had trouble thinking. The next day, my sister came to pick me up, and I stayed with her for a few days. Everyone thought I had tried to kill myself with drugs and alcohol. I started complaining about pains that weren't there before, so my sister took me to the hospital. I explained to them that I may have had unprotected sex while I was unconscious, and we followed procedures. A hepatitis B vaccine and a slew of samples. I was advised to file a complaint, and I was redirected to the OB emergency. The next day, I regained some consciousness. My family noticed right away that I was a little more alert and my statements made sense. I went to the GYN emergency, got swabs done, and started preventive AIDS treatment. Over the course of a week, I had several appointments for blood and urine samples. I also filed a complaint with the testimony of my friends who had been at my house and my sister who had taken care of me. After discussing it with people of all ages as well as medical staff and the police, the term organ trafficking was brought up. They believed the guy had chickened out at the last minute. Despite my complaint, my body covered in betadine, my torn underwear, and the blood on my apartment doors. What the hell? My attacker got away with it. I will never know what really happened or what he truly wanted. I want to point out that I used to drink and smoke, in addition to my treatment, and I've never had a blackout lasting 3 days before. I'm pretty sure he put something in my drink. It's good to talk about it though, so thank you. Hi there. I've shared this story with a few of my friends before, and after getting advice from some of them, I decided to post it here. I apologize in advance if my English isn't perfect, as it's not my first language. This happened when I was about 13 years old. I lived right on the beach, and if you walked about 1.5 kilometers down the shoreline, you'd reach a place where the ocean would leave behind a kind of lake. It was a popular spot where my friends and I liked to hang out, and next to it were 2 dirt roads. I had a German Shepherd, and every weekend my mother would kick me out of the house for a few hours to go play with the dog, which I didn't mind. There was a cliff above the beach that you could walk down to get to the lake, but it was covered with forest, and on that day it was especially hot. So I decided to take a shortcut through the forest to spare both myself and my dog from the heat. I'd done this many times before, so I wasn't afraid at all. However, as I was walking, I started to hear muffled footsteps behind me. My dog was off leash and up ahead, and I quickly realized that someone had to be sneaking up on me since it was almost impossible to walk quietly on the dry foliage. I made a run for it, heading toward the exit of the forest. As I did, the footsteps behind me became more audible. Fortunately, I made it out of the forest and to the lake, which was open and plain. I spotted one of my friends there. My dog was already in the water when I greeted her, but then we noticed a large man approaching us. He was easily close to 2 meters tall and very slim. He started talking to us both very kindly, and not thinking anything of it, we politely responded. At that time, I didn't connect the footsteps to this man, but later I realized I should have. He asked us a lot of questions, where we were from, if anyone was here with us, and so on. Little by little, we started feeling creeped out, so we said our goodbyes, claiming we had to meet up with our other friends and moved a bit further down the lake. We sat there for a while talking, when suddenly my dog started growling. She never growled, so this immediately caught my attention. I turned to see what she was growling at, and to my horror, the man was standing about 50 meters behind us. By now we realized what was going on and moved again, but he was even closer this time. We were terrified. This man was following us, and we were completely alone. My friend called her mother, who was at least an hour away, so we were stuck alone with this man for quite a while. The more we moved, the closer he came. I had to leash my dog as she was growling even more fiercely at him. Each time we looked at him, he smiled back, as if we were old friends. He followed us for a while until we saw my friend's mother's car arriving on the dirt road, which was about 200 meters away. To get there, we'd have to cross where the man was standing. We were absolutely terrified. Luckily, when my friend's mother saw the situation, she started running toward us, which got the man's attention and gave us the chance to dash. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I let my dog go and we sprinted for the car. As we reached it, the man started running after us, but we managed to get inside just in time. My friend's mother called the police, and we waited in the car while the man threw rocks and screamed at us. Eventually, he ran off when the police arrived. The police questioned everyone and went looking for the man, but they never found him. To this day, I'm still terrified he might be hiding in that forest, waiting for me. I didn't know that my friend would be there that day, and I don't know what would have happened if she wasn't. I didn't have a phone or any way to contact anyone, and I'm sure that if he had caught me, my dog wouldn't have been able to help. So to the creepy man who stalked me and my friend, let's never meet again. I've been thinking about sharing this incident for a while now. I've told people I know in person, but I want to get my story out there to help spread awareness about things like this, and in an effort to help put it further behind me. For some context, this happened to me in early April of this year. At the time, I was a 25-year-old male to female, MTF, transgender person, and I was pre-hormone replacement therapy, HRT, with more masculine clothes. At the risk of sounding cliche, I never thought something like what happened that evening could ever happen to me, but it did. The part that still bothers me is that it happened so close to where I live with my family. In fact, it was only 2 blocks away. Now, on to the incident. There have been a few times in our house when no one feels like cooking dinner, so we either order out or find our own food. That evening was one of those times. I was craving pizza, so after putting on my spring jacket and a pair of gloves, I left my house around 7:20 p.m. and started walking to the nearest Domino's. In case anyone asks, I can't drive, and it was only a 15-minute walk anyway. Partway there, I came across an old white car. I think it was either a Honda or a Ford that was parked on the sidewalk. I was annoyed but didn't think much about it. I decided to walk around the front of the car to avoid walking onto the road. Unfortunately, that's where I unintentionally caught the wrong kind of attention. I had barely stepped 10 feet away from the car when I suddenly heard 2 people calling out to me aggressively as I was readjusting my gloves. When I turned around, I saw 2 intimidating-looking men. The younger of the 2 approached me, while the older one remained by the door of the building where the car was parked. I don't remember much about the older guy, Thug 2, other than that he was a big man with a beard and a leather jacket. But I'll never forget the younger guy, Thug 1. He was slightly taller than me. I'm 5'6", with short hair and a goatee. He was wearing sneakers, a ring and blue jeans, and a white muscle shirt. This guy was aggressive from the start, getting into my personal space and immediately accusing me of breaking into his buddy's car. Thug 2 interjected with something along the lines of, "You better not have," which made me realize it was likely his car I just walked around, and I was being accused of breaking into it. I'm doing my best to describe what happened next, but honestly everything was a blur. I remember trying to explain myself, but Thug 1 didn't even give me the chance. I remember the anger in his eyes as he kept accusing me. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground, my right elbow cut open from the asphalt after being hit with a left hook to the face. I remember screaming at him to leave me alone as he punched me again, this time just above my hairline. I felt something warm on my head, pulled my gloved hand away, and saw blood where his ring had hit me. I had to scramble to pick up one of my breast forms that had fallen out of my pocket bra and onto the ground, before I managed to half stumble, half run away from the 2 men. They were taunting me, telling me I'd better run. Looking back, I wish I had pulled out my phone to take a picture of my attackers, but I think I subconsciously feared it would make things worse. This happened around 7:30 p.m. I managed to get as far away from the building as I could before sitting down in front of a nearby soccer club and calling my sister, 20 years old, for help. She immediately told my stepdad, and they both came to pick me up in his car. We stopped at Domino's to get my pizza, which I didn't end up finishing that night but ate the rest the next day, along with napkins and a bag of ice for my injuries. After dropping me off at home, my stepdad took my brother, 25 years old, and went back to the building to check for cameras that might show what happened, while my sister helped me sanitize my wounds. It was there that I started to understand what had really happened. It turned out the building in question was a base for a local biker gang, which was associated with one of the most infamous gangs in North America. My stepdad and brother talked to the members who were there. They later told me the white car was gone, and the two men I described were nowhere to be found. And they claimed 4 things. First, they claimed not to know who attacked me, even though those men had walked out of their gang base. Second, they claimed they were in the middle of a wake for a friend they had lost. Third, they said an hour before I walked by, a person under the influence of drugs had been messing with their car door, so they assumed I was that person. Lastly, despite knowing I was there, they claimed the cameras at the building were broken and not in use. At first, I considered not doing anything about what happened and just moving on. But after my dad called to check on me after hearing about the incident, I was convinced to go to the police station at 9 p.m. to file a report. While we all felt that the case probably wouldn't go anywhere, as it often does with incidents involving gangs, especially infamous ones, we knew it was still important to document it for the police. The officer taking my report suggested I go to the emergency room to be safe, where I ended up waiting for 5 to 7 hours to be seen by a doctor. During the wait, I was worried about what would happen if I fell asleep after taking 2 blows to the head. Thankfully, the doctor reassured me I would be fine while stitching up the wound where Thug 1 had hit me the second time. Eventually, I was sent home with instructions to be careful with my stitches while I showered, which I did as soon as I got home between 2:30 and 4:30 a.m. I'm very lucky that I didn't walk away with more serious injuries. After that night, it took me an entire week before I finally felt comfortable going outside. Even now, months later, despite the gang having moved their base, I still feel reluctant to walk right past that building. If I have to, I tend to walk on the other side of the road. I never saw Thug 1 or Thug 2 again, though I heard rumors that the gang punished them for assaulting me as they were allegedly trying to reduce their violence. And honestly, I hope I never see them again. I'm a little shaky recalling that night while typing this, but I wanted to share my story to help raise awareness about gang violence. It was autumn in 2015 and I was 23 years old. I am now 31. At that time, I lived in Lancaster while studying at Lancaster University. For those who may not be familiar, Lancaster is a small, charming town in the north of England. As a student, you could either live on campus or in private accommodation in the town. I had chosen to live in a newly renovated apartment in a nice part of town, and yes, it was expensive. I had already been studying for 2 years and was now in my 3rd year. By this time, I had become familiar with the layout of the town and felt comfortable and safe living there semi-independently, along with 2 other friends who were also studying at the university. Since my 1st year, I had decided to improve my fitness by going on nightly runs around either the campus or the town. By my 3rd year, I was living in the town center, so I would either run with my housemate or on my own. It's important to note that Lancaster has a large residential area that is hilly and far from the bustling town center, which at the time was a hub for students and locals, probably drinking in pubs or eating pies. Occasionally, I would run with my housemate, but I preferred running alone listening to heavy metal. I was a big fan of Deftones during that period. On this particular evening, a chilly autumn night, I had decided to run alone. It was about 8 p.m. and I had my earphones in. I had started running toward a more isolated district that led to a beautiful residential area and a large park called Williamson Park. The park had a butterfly museum at the top of a hill. Next to the park was a large graveyard, the kind that stretches for miles and has different sections. Large yew trees, crumbling graves, and a crypt in the center overrun with leaves and ivy. What was especially eerie about this cemetery was that it contained the ruins of an old mental asylum or hospital. You could sneak into the asylum grounds by walking across the cemetery and crawling through a small hole in the fence. This wasn't recommended though, since guard dogs roamed the derelict building. It was definitely not a place you wanted to be at night. So I made my way past Williamson Park and up to the entrance of the graveyard. Immediately, my attention was drawn to something small, standing by the imposing gates of the graveyard. These gates were tall black iron and located at the bottom of a winding path. I felt a little apprehensive, but it wasn't unusual to see people walking their dogs around the graveyard. So I slowed my pace and started walking toward the shape. As I got closer, I realized that the shape was a child, around 9 or 10 years old. She was running toward me frantically. She looked panicked and scared, and I think she was crying. I vividly remember that the girl wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin dress that would not be suitable for the cold autumn air in Lancaster. She asked me for help. She was desperate and seemed frightened of something. She kept looking back into the graveyard, which was completely pitch black beyond the gates. There was absolutely no light beyond the path. The graveyard was large, so it was unsettling to see the depth of the darkness and the vulnerable child standing at the entrance, helpless. I don't recall exactly what the girl said, but I offered to call the police. I had dialed 999 on my phone and put it on loudspeaker. The girl immediately changed. She wasn't happy that I was calling the police, and it was obvious. She stopped crying and her tone became angry and demanding. She insisted that she didn't need the police. I reassured her that it would be best to inform the police. I even offered to walk her to the station, which was about 20 minutes down the hill. This is where the story gets strange and a little terrifying. The girl turned and ran back into the graveyard. She ran directly through the gates into the pitch-black darkness. She didn't turn back, just ran as fast as she could until she completely disappeared. It was then completely silent. I was spooked beyond belief. Standing alone in a darkened street, I had so many questions. Who was the girl? Why was she alone? Why was she afraid of the police? Why wasn't she scared of the dark? Who might she have been running to or from? I turned and ran all the way back down the hill, not stopping until I reached a well-lit, populated area. Safe to say I didn't run alone at night again. Anyway, it's a mystery that has haunted me ever since. Little girl in the graveyard, let's definitely not meet again. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and I've been living in the same apartment complex for nearly 4 years. There's a guy who's about 45 years old who lives on the same floor as me, and he's been there for about the past year or so. He is so awful. I usually don't pay much attention to or recognize many of the people who live here, but I quickly started noticing this guy because of how rude he is. Whenever we would happen to ride the elevator together in the morning before work, he would just glare at me. Then, when we'd walk out the glass doors into the parking lot, I'd be walking behind him, and he'd let the doors close on me without holding them open. One day, about 6 months ago, my fiancé and I walked up behind him waiting for the elevator. When he saw us, he stood in front of us and shook his head almost in disgust. Keep in mind that neither my fiancé nor I had ever had a conversation with this man. Then things started to get really strange. About 6 months ago, I decided to hold the elevator doors open for him when I saw him coming down the hall. He thanked me, and when we got downstairs, for the first time ever, he held the doors open for me. The next time my then fiancé, now husband, saw him in the parking lot, whenever he saw my husband with me, he mouthed effing garbage to himself as he passed us. But it gets worse. Whenever I see him alone in the parking lot, he smiles at me. It's almost like he's smirking, like two people who have some sort of history together, or like we know each other personally. It's so weird. About a month ago, when he saw my husband and me together again in the mailroom, he covered his face with his mail. Can someone please explain what the hell is going on with this man? I took a lot of psychology classes in college, and even I can't explain this behavior. I'm honestly getting strange serial killer vibes. Like I said, we have literally never had a conversation with him. My husband and I are both very friendly people, and I feel like we give off those kinds of vibes. It's just so strange.